my name is Gabriel, and I'm going to be telling you about Graphical Economies with Resale, which is joint work with Rafael Frongillo, Elliot Gorokhovsky, and Sharadha Srinivasan. Our work falls under the general umbrella of, falls under the umbrella of general equilibrium theory, which is a staple of theoretical economics that has a long history and some very solid mathematical underpinnings. The theory attempts to explain the behavior of supply, demand, and prices in markets. And the central model of this theory is the Brew model. A generic setup for the Brew model is a set of agents, each having their own endowment and a utility function, which describes how much value they extract from goods they buy for consumption. The story we like to tell is that the agents meet up at some market, they present all their endowments, and prices get set on each good. It's convenient sometimes to think about an auctioneer of some sort setting the prices. And then agents take their profits and they purchase goods to maximize their utility. This model's essentially planned economy, which has a single global market where each good only has a single price, meaning apples have a price regardless of who is selling them. That's how we can think about it intuitively. In addition, every pair of agents are able to trade with one another in the Brew exchange economy. The equilibrium concept is again, in global terms, demand has to be, demand for all the agent's goods when it's accumulated has to equal the supply of all the agent's goods when they're accumulated. And often we would like something more local. This isn't very intuitive when trade is restricted. For example, when there are social relationships involved or trade agreements, or geographic restrictions. There's plenty of economic scenarios we could highlight. To address this, Kakad, Kearns, and Ortiz introduced a graph theoretic generalization of the Brew exchange economy. In their model, they have the same setup: agents, endowments, and utilities. But instead of all the agents meeting at this centralized market, they each become their own local market in some sense, because there's an underlying graph connecting them. And this graph describes who may trade with whom via the edges. So an edge represents now that one agent can trade with another. Now we have this network of local markets, and each agent will set their own price on their goods, and only pairs of agents can trade, as we mentioned. But now the equilibrium concept becomes more local, where the market clears if demand is met on each agent and the supply is met for each agent. This is a typo on the slide, I apologize. It captures the underlying structures of economies rather well. But there are some cases where it can be unintuitive and too local in some sense. To see this, let's consider the following scenario where you have this chain of agents. But to move away from this sort of clip art world that we're living in, let's be a little more formal and treat each agent as a node themselves. So we have the first agent on the left being 1, middle agent 2, third agent 3. And instead of having this bag of oranges, we have an endowment vector, where the first good represents oranges, and the second good represents the apples. So we see that the second agent, which has no endowments, has 0, 0, versus the first agent, which has only oranges, has 1, 0. And here we have these utility vectors, which are meant to capture linear utilities in this case, meaning that the first agent only has utility for apples. In this scenario, the middle agent has no endowment and therefore cannot profit from selling their endowments. And they're impartial between the two goods, they like either one. The first agent only wants the second good. But if they profit from selling their endowment, meaning they set a non-zero price on their endowment, then they must spend it on goods that are unavailable in the economy. So the market wouldn't be able to clear at equilibrium. If agents 1 and 3 do not profit, then what happens, because the second agent, the middle agent, is impartial to goods, their rationality dictates that they would ask for an infinite amount of these goods in some sense. So again, the market could not clear. We therefore conclude that no equilibrium could exist in this sort of example for the KKO model. And an intuitive resolution of this would be if the agent in the middle behaved like a broker, because they would intuitively look at the two agents around them and say, oh, I can make this work out for everybody. So in our paper, we introduced graphical economies with Resale to address exactly this. We introduced basically introduced Resale to each of these agents, which can be thought of as a line of credit to be in an intuitive sense. And this credit allows agents to leverage their position in the network and buy goods that are cheaper from one agent, for one neighbor, and resell it to agents in their neighborhood that would buy it for a higher price. So they can then make profit and arbitrage their position. This allows us to interpolate between the KKO and AD model, as will be shown later. For the remainder talk, I'll tell you about the model, some standard existence results, an auction-based algorithm for finding approximate equilibria, and then conclude with some discussion. Our model has the same setup as the KKO model. You have a set of M agents and a set of L divisible goods. And there's an underlying trade graph, which, as we mentioned, will encode who may trade with whom via the edges. Each agent has an endowment vector, where each element of the vector says how much of a good that agent has when they start off, and a utility function, which again encodes the value that they extract from goods that they will ultimately buy to consume. And now there's an additional resale capacity, and this is where our model starts to differ from these previous models we mentioned. The resale capacity will allow the agents to intermediate trade in these networks. Intuitively, it can be thought of as a two-phase process, though I want to emphasize that it is still a one-shot process as we see in Brew economies and the KKO economies. The two phases that we can think about intuitively is a resale phase, where the agents essentially look at the prices in their neighborhood, and if they can profit from some price discrepancy, then they will use their credit to do this. Then the next phase is just the standard Brew or KKO framework, where they take this profit from resale plus the profit from selling any endowments they might have had, and they use this to buy goods for consumption and maximizing their own utility. More formally, we have this notion of resale equilibrium in this model, which is given in terms of this resale capacity vector, which kind of just bundles up all the resale capacities in the market. It has the local prices for each agent, where P superscript I says the price that agent I has on each good that they will sell. And then there's these consumption bundles where Xij represents the amount that I buys from J for consumption. And finally, this resale bundle, Yij, which says how much I buys from J for resale. The resale equilibrium is a triple of prices, consumption bundles, and resale bundles. Three properties need to be satisfied by the resale equilibria. They need to satisfy local clearing, which says that goods bought from an agent for either resale or consumption by their neighbors has to equal the endowments that that agent has, plus the resale bundles that agent has purchased from their neighbors for profiting. Each agent must satisfy what we call optimal arbitrage, which states that resale bundles maximize profit subject to their resale capacity. And there's and the consumption bundles must satisfy individual rationality, which states that the consumption bundles maximize utility subject to the profits that they've made from both resale and their endowments. This allows us to interpolate between AD and KKO in a rather intuitive way. If B, the resale capacities, are sufficiently large, then, for example, if it's enough to buy all goods in the economy all at once and resell them, then resale is essentially unrestricted, and any price discrepancy in the economy will cause unbounded trade, essentially, and so the market wouldn't be able to clear. Therefore, all prices must be equal in the economy, and we recover AD. If the resale capacities are all set to zero, then nobody has the ability to resell. They have a zero credit, essentially, and what we just get is KKO again, because no resale is possible, and we just have these local exchange economies. To see how this plays out in that broker example from before, let's revisit it. And let's pretend like the prices are the way that we set up here, where we have alpha for where the agents at the end of the chain have alpha on the good they're endowed with as the price, and all the prices are one in the economy. What we have now is that the first and the third agent can't profit from resale because they could only resell their own good, right? Unless, of course, alpha is greater than 1, but let's assume that that's not true. So they can't profit from resale, so they're just going to abstain from that part of the process. The second agent, however, can profit from resale. So they split their resale equally between 1 and 3, since the amount that they can profit is no better between these two options. Once they resell goods, they then will take the profit they do from that, and they'll just buy the rest of the endowments left at the ends of the chain for themselves, while passing over the amount they resold to the opposite side of the chain. We see something along these lines, where ultimately the flow of goods goes all the goods flow to agent 2, and then they pass alpha over to the other end of the chain, and they keep 1 minus alpha for themselves. And we do find an equilibrium now because agent 2 was able to act as a broker and leverage their position. So more generally, what we find is that equilibrium will exist under some pretty weak assumptions that are very standard in economics. They're very comparable to what we see in the Andrade Brew case. We require that for result equilibrium to exist, we show that we need that the utilities are quasi-concave, continuous, and strictly monotone on some good for each agent. That resale behaves essentially like that credit bound. In the paper, we are more general about this, but we'll leave that out for now. But basically, all you need, what we need to think about is that if you have no credit, you don't resell. If you see the possibility of profiting, you take advantage of that, and that the set of feasible plans for resale are closed and convex. We also require that every agent either is able to resell or that their endowment vector is dense, meaning they have some of every good. Finally, we need that every good exists in the economy if it's part of it, so we shouldn't include it in the economy if nobody is endowed with it, and that basically the underlying trade graph is well connected in a supply-demand sense, which is kind of tough to formalize, but essentially it means that if I am non-satiable, or if I really desire a single good, then there is some chain of trade which can get me that good. That's what's important for the fifth assumption. When we put these together, we get this nice propagation argument for proving this. Basically, the first two assumptions, which are very standard in general equilibrium theory, allow us to establish that quasi-equilibria exist. Quasi-equilibria are a weakening of the equilibrium concept, where agents are rational if they make a profit, and if they don't make a profit, they can kind of do whatever they want within the bounds of the fact that they don't have any money. But another important part of quasi-equilibria is that prices, it's defined in terms of normalized prices. So we have at least one non-zero price in the economy. The third assumption, which states that agents are either able to resell or they have endowments of all the goods, says that agents with a non-zero price will either resell or own the good itself. If they have resale, then what happens is that they must leverage prices around their neighborhood, and therefore what we'll have is that non-zero price will propagate throughout their entire neighborhood. Meanwhile, if an agent owns the good, then they make a profit, so they are by definition rational. In either case, we see that the non-zero prices will kind of move throughout the network in that local neighborhood. Assumption 4 and 5, when we put those together, will allow us to actually repeat this argument recursively and ultimately see that non-zero prices will propagate throughout the entire economy. And if they propagate throughout the entire economy, by the similar argument to what we saw in with the assumption 3, it must be that every agent in the economy is rational. And so we get that equilibrium will always exist in any economy satisfying these assumptions. Next, we introduce an auction-based algorithm for computing approximations of these equilibria. The algorithm has an actual interpretation as essentially an ascending price auction that's simultaneously happening at each of the agents. All the prices start at 1, and they get monotonically increased throughout the algorithm. Consumption and resale start at 0, and they, again, will start to basically barter with one another to try and consume and resell goods. And then agents at the very start have just a budget that is exactly equal to the total sum of their endowments. The algorithm proceeds through a main loop where an agent gets chosen. It doesn't particularly matter the order or how we do this, but an agent gets chosen. If they have any surplus budget, they then will try to use that budget to place bids on their neighbors' goods. Their neighbors try to meet that bid by either assigning goods that they have currently to that agent, or if that agent has just outbid somebody else, they will then basically reassign the good to the higher bidder. And if that's not possible, then they use resale to try and match that demand. And if they can't do that, then and only then will they raise the price by a fixed increment. This gets repeated over and over and over again until finally the market clears exactly and we have an exact equilibrium, or all the budgets get spent within some tolerated error that we define in the algorithm in terms of some epsilon. The output is an approximate resale equilibrium, and we have a runtime which is a function of the max price down in the algorithm. To prove this runtime, because we have this resale component, we had to introduce a new type of potential function argument to prove this that hasn't been shown in previous auction-based algorithms, which is pretty neat, and I wish I had time to go over it. But unfortunately, we don't. And finally, to conclude, I just wanted to mention that in this work, I motivated it with credit-bound resale, or resale that works like credit, essentially, these lines of credit analogy that I was using. But really, there's many types of resale. It's a very general concept. We're primarily motivated by two types of resale. The first is credit-bound resale. As I mentioned, it's what I've been suggesting this entire talk. And it bounds resale based on the total cost of goods being sold using resale. Again, we can think of this as the total available credit to each agent or the line of credit they have. It's the credit cards. And all of our results apply to this type of credit, this type of resale. The other very intuitive and motivating type of resale that we consider is something called commodity-bound resale, where resale bounds the total quantity of goods being resold by an agent. The intuition here is that it's a storage or bandwidth limitation, however you want to pitch it. But it basically just bounds the raw amount of goods being pushed through an agent. Existence would require some stronger assumptions, but it can be done for credit-bound resale. Intuitively, the problem with credit-bound resale is that agents will sometimes just not resell. Like having a price of 0 will not cause a blow-up in the economy, which is problematic for trying to use that propagation argument we mentioned earlier. Sometimes agents just won't behave as one would like, so you need some stronger assumptions. The algorithm, though, that applies as is. There's no caveats there for commodity-bound resale. To conclude, we introduced these graphical economies with resale, and we showed that it really captures some very intuitive scenarios that we would hope from general equilibrium models. And we showed that these resale equilibria have some desirable properties like general existence, they're flexible and intuitive, and we have an algorithm for approximating them. There's several open questions that are wide open with this model, and this work can go way forward with this work. Some very interesting ones, some notable ones are the relationship between graph theoretic parameters like degree centrality and equilibrium outcomes, and then other generalizations to production.